She walked the freight road with no coat until a cowboy recognized the locket she hid. Mei Lin Zhao did not look back when the freight wagons passed her. The road was hard-packed and uneven, dust lifting in sharp gusts that caught at her thin sleeves. But she kept walking with her arms folded tight and her pace steady. No coat, no pause, just forward movement. The silver locket rested beneath her collarbone, hidden under fabric, its chain cool against her skin. She had learned to keep it concealed because silver drew attention, and attention drew questions. When the wind shifted, the collar of her dress loosened and the metal flashed once in the sun. Brief, bright, unmistakable. Caleb Mercer saw it from horseback. He had been riding parallel to the freight line, counting cattle in the distance, when the reflection cut across his vision. He slowed his horse and watched again. The locket swung free a second time as she adjusted the cloth bundle at her side. He turned his horse toward her without calling out. Mei Lin heard the hooves and stepped farther off the road, expecting him to pass, but the horse stopped a few feet away. She did not look up immediately. Stillness had often been safer than response. His voice came calm and direct, asking about the silver at her throat. She lifted her gaze then and saw his attention fixed not on her face, but on the chain. She covered the locket with her hand and denied knowing what he meant. He did not argue. He asked her to open it. She shook her head once. Wind moved dust between them. He dismounted slowly, boots steady against the ground, and did not reach for her or block her path. He simply stood there and said it had belonged to his sister. The claim shifted the space between them. Mei Lin's fingers tightened around the locket she had carried since the rail camp, since the sickness, since the woman who had pressed it into her palm and told her never to lose it. She answered that it was hers. His expression sharpened but did not rise. He repeated the request. For the first time since stepping onto the freight road, Mei Lin hesitated, and the air between them felt colder than the wind. She did not open the locket at once. Her palm remained pressed against the silver, as if holding it shut could keep the moment contained. But Caleb did not step forward or look away. He waited, steady and unmoving, while freight wagons creaked past and drivers slowed just enough to watch. She felt their attention settle and disliked that the question was no longer private. She said only that the locket had been given to her. He asked by whom. She did not answer directly. Instead, she drew the chain from beneath her collar and let the pendant rest in her hand. Her thumb found the worn notch along the edge and pressed. The hinge gave. Inside lay a faded photograph protected behind thin glass. A white woman seated against a rail post, hair loosely pinned, exhaustion visible but not surrender, holding a newborn wrapped in cloth. Caleb's breath paused, though the world did not. The wagons continued forward, wind lifting dust between them. But he went still. He said quietly that it was her. Mei Lin closed the locket halfway, uncertain whether to hide it again, then answered that the woman had raised her at a rail camp. Caleb looked at her fully now, not at the chain, but at her face, measuring age, structure, the line of her jaw. He asked how old she was. She answered that she was 20. The number settled into him without display. His sister had disappeared 20 years earlier during a rail relocation. No body recovered, no grave marked, only absence. He asked for the woman's name. Mei Lin said she had never used a surname and had spoken little of her past. She had told her only to keep moving and never lose the locket. Caleb returned his gaze to the photograph and studied the small scar near the woman's eyebrow. He remembered it clearly. He had caused it when they were children, chasing each other along a creek. His voice did not rise when he said the woman was his sister. He stated it as fact. The freight road that had stretched wide behind them seemed to narrow. The silver no longer felt incidental. He closed the space between doubt and certainty without touching her and told her to recount everything she remembered. This time it was not a demand. It was necessary. Mei Lin did not answer at once. She chose her words carefully, speaking in fragments rather than in sequence. There had been sickness at the rail camp, coughing that turned to fever, then silence where people once lay. The woman had already been weak by the time Mei Lin remembered her clearly, and had said the camp would not survive the winter. When supplies thinned, people disappeared. Caleb listened without interrupting. She kept her tone even. The woman had named her Mei Lin, and once, during fever, had called her Lily. The name settled between them. Caleb's sister had been Elizabeth, but she had insisted on Lily as a child, a name not used outside family. He asked how long Mei Lin had stayed with her. 2 winters. Then the woman had given her the locket and sent her east with the Zhao family, saying they would protect her. She had warned her not to speak of where she came from. Caleb asked why. Mei Lin said she had never been told, only that it was not safe. The woman had died that same night. Mei Lin buried her with help from a rail worker who did not ask questions. Caleb absorbed the timeline without display. His sister had vanished during a rail relocation 20 years earlier with no proof of death. He studied Mei Lin's posture, the steadiness in her voice, the way she held herself under scrutiny. He asked whether the woman had spoken of family. Mei Lin said she had mentioned a brother, too stubborn to quit and too soft to admit it. Caleb did not react outwardly, but recognition settled in his gaze. The freight road behind them no longer felt incidental. If the story aligned, the locket was not only memory, but claim. And claim would not remain private for long. Caleb did not question her immediately. He looked once down the freight road behind her, then asked what else the woman had told her. Mei Lin tightened her grip on the cloth bundle and answered that the camp had not been safe for a child, that men there noticed what they should not. Caleb's jaw set, but his voice remained even. She said the woman had hidden her first in supply crates, later in the cook tent with the Zhao family after losing strength. The Zhao family had lost their daughter that winter and taken Mei Lin in. The woman had made her promise never to remove the locket, and had told her that if anyone recognized it, she should listen before she ran. Caleb repeated the phrase quietly. It fit the sister he remembered. He asked whether anyone else had known. Mei Lin said a rail foreman had once warned the woman she would not live long enough to raise a child not her own. The woman had answered that blood did not ask permission. Caleb absorbed the words without comment. He stepped slightly closer, reducing distance without pressing her. He asked again about the name Lily. Mei Lin said it had been spoken during fever, and that the woman had told her not to let others rename her for convenience. Caleb understood the meaning without explanation. The freight wagons had moved farther down the road, their noise fading. The space between them felt narrower. He asked to see behind her ear. She hesitated only briefly before shifting her braid aside. A faint crescent birthmark rested there. Caleb recognized it immediately. His sister had carried the same mark in the same place. He did not touch it or declare anything. He stepped back, recalculating what it meant. If the mark, the name, and the timeline aligned, then the freight road she had walked was not random. It had led her back. Caleb straightened without display, recognition settling into him quietly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The freight wagons had rolled farther ahead, but 2 men from the rear team lingered near the bend in the road, watching longer than passing interest required. Mei Lin sensed the shift before she saw it, the kind of attention that measured rather than glanced. One man nudged the other and spoke low, but she caught enough. Chinese girl, Cowboy. She stepped back slightly. Attention along freight lines was rarely harmless. Caleb adjusted his stance, not shielding her completely but making his position clear. He did not glare or threaten. He simply stood. The two men approached at an unhurried pace, confidence drawn from numbers. One asked whether everything was in order. Caleb answered that it was. The man's gaze settled on the silver chain at Mei Lin's throat and asked if it belonged to her. She met his eyes and nodded once. The second man remarked that silver like that invited trouble. Caleb responded evenly that they should keep walking. He did not raise his voice or reach for a weapon. The steadiness carried more weight than confrontation. The men exchanged a look, weighing curiosity against risk. One added that Town had been asking about her. Caleb replied that Town could ask him. There was no shift in tone, only certainty. The first man tipped his hat in brief acknowledgement and turned back toward the wagons, though not without a final glance. The road felt different once they were gone. Rumor traveled quickly along freight lines, and if men had noticed, Town would soon. Mei Lin said he did not need to involve himself. Caleb answered that he already was. The exchange was not heated, it was settled. The freight road ahead no longer felt open. It felt observed. And for the first time since stepping onto it, Mei Lin understood that the silver had drawn more than recognition. It had drawn attention that would not fade quietly. Caleb mounted and extended his hand without urgency. He said she would not walk alone. Mei Lin looked once at the freight road ahead and at the wagons already moving on. Walking alone had often been simpler, but attention had already found her. She took his hand, and he lifted her onto the horse without display. They rode beside the freight line at an even pace, neither hiding nor announcing the decision. After a stretch of silence, he asked about the Zhao family. She said they had moved south years earlier, and that she had remained near freight roads where work followed movement. He asked what kind of work: cooking, mending, cleaning wagons when they stopped. He absorbed the detail without comment. It was a life built on motion, not shelter. He asked whether anyone had questioned the locket before. She said most men did not look closely. He kept his eyes forward and said his sister had disappeared 20 years earlier during a rail relocation with no body and no proof. The timeline pressed between them. He added that if he was wrong, he would say so. She studied his expression. He was measuring fact, not chasing hope. She asked what it meant if he was right. He did not answer immediately. Wind lifted dust around the horse's hooves before he said, she would not be only a traveler on the freight road. She would be blood. The word altered the balance between them. She had been Zhao, cook, laborer, traveler. She had never been claimed as inheritance. She said blood changed things. He agreed. Ahead, the wagons slowed near a watering stop, and the two men who had lingered earlier turned to look again. Attention had already shifted. Rumor was forming. She understood that riding into town beside him would not pass unnoticed. Whatever name was spoken next would carry weight beyond passing interest. They rode into town beside the freight wagons without concealment, and that alone drew attention. Conversations paused, hands slowed at the pump, and by the time Caleb dismounted near the hitching rail, eyes were fixed on the space between them. Mei Lin felt the shift immediately. This was not idle curiosity but assessment. One of the freight hands made a remark loud enough to carry, laughter following thinly. Caleb ignored it and helped her down without display. He said only that she rode with him. No explanation followed. The words altered the tone of the yard. The merchant stepped from his store and observed that Town had been asking about her. He noted that it was unusual to see a freight girl escorted so deliberately. Mei Lin kept her posture steady. Caleb positioned himself beside her rather than in front. He said Town could ask him. The merchant's gaze settled on the silver chain visible at her collar. He remarked that such pieces carried history and should be handled carefully. Caleb replied that it wasn't being claimed but recognized. The distinction unsettled more than argument. Whispers shifted from suspicion to speculation. When someone asked how, Caleb answered by blood. The word carried further than intended. The merchant called it bold. Caleb said it was not a statement. Silence followed. Mei Lin felt herself being measured not as traveler, but as question. Entering town beside him had shifted the story. She was no longer passing through. She was being positioned. When Caleb turned toward the boarding house instead of the freight yard, the direction confirmed it. She would not leave unnoticed. Whatever truth rested inside the locket would now move through town openly rather than along the edges. Caleb did not turn toward the freight yard. He led her past it to the storage building behind the boarding house, where abandoned trunks from old rail transfers were stacked beneath warped stairs. Townsfolk followed at a distance close enough to witness. He knelt beside a dust-covered trunk marked with faint initials carved into the wood and brushed away grime until 2 letters showed clearly. E.M. He forced the latch open without ceremony. Inside lay folded fabric stiff with age and a small embroidered blanket. The thread faded but intact. Mei Lin stepped forward and touched the stitching. She recognized it immediately. She had slept wrapped in that blanket near a rail fire. Caleb said it had belonged to his sister. She confirmed the woman had wrapped her in it the night she was sent away. The crowd shifted. The merchant suggested coincidence. Caleb answered by asking for the mark. Without waiting, Mei Lin tucked her braid aside and revealed the crescent birthmark behind her ear. Caleb stood and stated that his sister carried the same mark. There was no display in his tone, only certainty. Whispers broke into uneasy silence. The merchant said grief could create stories. Caleb replied that blood did not. The exchange ended without escalation. What had been rumor settled into fact for those watching. Mei Lin understood the shift. She was no longer only a freight traveler carrying silver. The trunk, the blanket, the mark aligned. The road that had carried her alone now led to recognition. Inheritance had moved from suggestion to evidence, and the town could no longer treat it lightly. Silence held the yard longer than expected. The blanket remained open in the trunk, its faded stitching visible in the late light while townsfolk stood weighing what they had seen. Attention had shifted from doubt to calculation. Inheritance suggested land, name, claim. The merchant stepped forward and said that a matching mark wasn't proof. Caleb answered that proof was pattern. He asked Mei Lin whether she had seen the scar above the woman's brow. She confirmed she had. He stated it came from a fall near a creek in childhood. The detail aligned. The merchant did not press further. Uncertainty replaced dismissal. Mei Lin looked from the trunk to the gathered faces. Zhao had given her shelter and work. The freight road had given her survival. This was something else. Origin. She said that if she was the woman's daughter, it did not make her less Zhao. Caleb responded that it made her more. The distinction settled without argument. When asked what she intended to claim, she said only what was hers. Not land, not display, but acknowledgement. The freight hands shifted uneasily. Rumor had become reckoning. Caleb stood beside her without speaking for her. He did not assert guardianship. He allowed her words to stand. As the sun lowered behind the buildings, the direction of the story became clear. She would not abandon one name for another. She would carry both. And the town understood that the choice had been made publicly, not in secrecy. The freight wagons left before dawn, as they always had, wheels grinding against stone. But Mei Lin did not rise to follow. She stood on the boarding house porch with the silver locket visible at her collar and watched the road stretch away without her. No one gathered to whisper. The town had already settled its conclusion. Caleb stood beside her without directing her choice. The trunk had been moved to his barn the night before, the blanket stored where weather would not reach it. Proof required protection, not display. He said she did not owe him a decision. She considered the words without hurry. Zhao had given her shelter, the freight road had given her endurance, and blood had given her origin. None of it required surrendering the other. She touched the locket, feeling the seam along its hinge, and said she was still Mei Lin. He agreed. She added that she would not deny having been Lily first. The names did not compete. They aligned. Caleb's expression did not shift into relief or triumph. It settled. Wind moved across the porch without urgency. The road no longer pulled at her. She stepped down, not toward the departing wagons, but toward the pasture beyond town where work waited. Caleb walked beside her without reaching for her hand. No gesture was required. The space between them had already closed. Once she had walked the freight road alone and unnoticed. Now she moved forward with name, lineage, and choice intact. And she did not walk alone. If someone recognized something you were trying to hide, would you run or listen? Do you think blood matters more than the name that raised you? If this story meant something to you, like the video, subscribe Native American Tales for more frontier stories of quiet strength and hidden truths, and share it with someone who believes identity is something you choose.